Human history, as we are usually taught, often begins with numbers, timelines, and ancient civilizations. But the Qur'an tells a very different story. That story does not begin with kings or wars. It begins in absolute stillness, when Allah created the first human from earth, breathed a soul into him and entrusted him with a responsibility no other creation had ever carried. That moment shaped the destiny of all humanity. And from that very moment, a profound question was planted. Why do human beings, despite being created with knowledge and honor, keep repeating the same mistakes that lead to collapse? Welcome to the channel Prophetic History Explained. This is not just a place where we retell the stories of the prophets. It is where we trace the unseen laws that have governed humanity from the very beginning until today. Adam was not created as a flawless being incapable of error. On the contrary, he was created with free will, with the ability to make mistakes, but also with the capacity for repentance. When Adam ate from the forbidden tree, history did not turn toward despair. There was no eternal curse, no complete separation. Instead, there were tears, sincere supplication, and forgiveness from Allah. At the very starting point of history, Allah established a fundamental principle. Human beings may fall, but the door back is never permanently closed. This spiritual foundation is what every prophet after him continued to build upon. From Adam, humanity entered its first phase of knowledge and social formation. Idris appeared not in a primitive wilderness, but within a community learning how to live together. He taught people writing, clothing, and construction, and the observation of the heavens. Faith here was not separated from daily life. It flowed into every skill and every advancement. Idris showed that worshiping Allah does not cause humanity to fall behind. On the contrary, true belief is what drives civilization forward. Yet at the same time, a quiet danger emerged. As knowledge grew while faith weakened, people began to trust themselves more than the one who granted them that knowledge. As time passed and generations followed one another, deviation did not arrive overnight. It crept in slowly as people gradually forgot the purpose of their existence. By the time of Nuh, society was no longer just individuals making mistakes. It had become a collective rejection of truth. The most frightening part was not that they were never warned, but that they were warned so many times that they stopped taking it seriously. Nuh called his people for centuries, not with force, but with patience and compassion. Yet the harsh reality of history is this: when hearts become hardened, even the truth loses its meaning. The Great Flood was not an impulsive act. It was the inevitable outcome of a society that had completely severed its connection with Allah. Nuh's ark did not only save the believers, it became a symbol of the final opportunity that humanity so often ignores. When the waters receded and the ark came to rest, the world was not merely rebuilt geographically, it was rebuilt spiritually. Humanity emerged with a severe reminder. Human existence is not guaranteed by strength, numbers, or tradition, but by the relationship people maintain with Allah. If you think these stories belong only to the distant past, that very assumption is why history keeps repeating itself. Adam, Idris, and Nuh are not just the first names mentioned in the Qur'an. They represent three foundational pillars of humanity: repentance, knowledge, and warning. When any one of these pillars collapses, society begins to slide without even realizing it. After this mysterious opening filled with difficult questions, our journey truly begins. But before we dive deeper into the powerful civilizations that once believed they were invincible, take a moment to support Prophetic History Explained by subscribing and following the channel. Your support is what allows us to continue sharing these sacred, profound, and cautionary stories all the way to the end of humanity's journey. After the great flood of Nuh, humanity did not emerge from the ruins with the humility it should have had. Instead, as time passed, people quickly built new societies and new civilizations, along with a dangerous illusion that strength, wealth, and technology could replace Allah. It was during this period that a harsh historical pattern began repeating itself, not once, but many times across nations that once stood at the peak of power. The people of Ad were one such community. They lived in fertile lands, controlled major trade routes, and built towering structures that struck fear into surrounding nations. Their power was not only in their wealth, but in their blind belief that no one could defeat them. When Hud was sent to them, his message was simple. Remember Allah, the one who granted you everything you take pride in. But their prosperity blinded them. They did not reject Allah due to a lack of evidence. They rejected him because they did not want to accept that their power was limited. When drought persisted and warnings were mocked, they still believed they would overcome everything as they always had. Then a scorching wind wiped out an entire civilization, leaving behind silent ruins as testimony to arrogance that had crossed its limit. If Ad represented brute strength and self-satisfaction, Thamud represented technical intelligence and human sophistication. They carved homes into mountains, built fortified cities, and believed they had conquered nature itself. When Salih was sent, they did not ask for explanations. They demanded a specific, undeniable sign, and that sign appeared before their eyes. The she-camel was not only a miracle, but a test of their hearts. When the authority of their leaders felt threatened, the miracle stopped being proof and became a danger. Killing the she-camel was not just an act of cruelty. It was a public declaration that they chose status and self-interest over truth. The 3 days of warning that followed were not a delay, but a final opportunity. When it was ignored, a thunderous blast and violent shaking ended a people who believed themselves untouchable. The story of Lut introduces another form of corruption, more subtle and more dangerous. This was no longer about power or technology, but about moral decay at the societal level. The people of Sodom did not sin in secret. They turned sin into a public lifestyle, defended it, and imposed it on others. The weak were hunted, travelers were stripped of dignity, and injustice became normal. When Lut called them back to Allah, their response was not debate, but threats and violence. This showed that their hearts were not only closed to truth, but willing to destroy anyone who reminded them of it. The punishment of Sodom was not excessive. It was the end of a system that had rotted at its core. The cities were overturned, stones rained down, and a society that believed itself free was erased completely. The Qur'an emphasizes that they were not destroyed merely for personal sins, but because they enforced, normalized, and protected wrongdoing as a standard. When a society reaches the point where goodness is seen as strange and evil is celebrated, collapse is no longer a possibility, it becomes inevitable. The stories of Hud, Salih, and Lut are not told simply to inspire fear. They reveal a deep historical law. Every civilization collapses from within before it is destroyed from outside. Allah does not destroy a people while they still have the capacity to reform. He sends prophets, signs, and time. But when arrogance convinces people that they stand above all moral standards, what they are most proud of becomes the cause of their destruction. The most striking realization is this: these civilizations did not fall because they were poor or backward. They fell at their peak, when they believed nothing could restrain them. This is not only history of the past, it is a mirror held up to any society that believes power, technology, or absolute freedom can replace the guidance of Allah. When humanity forgets its limits, history is always ready to repeat the lesson in one form or another. Amid the cycles of collapse of once proud civilizations, human history took a different direction when Allah chose Ibrahim. He did not appear among the weak or undeveloped, but within a culture saturated with idols where people bowed to what their own hands had carved. Ibrahim grew up in an environment where worship had lost its soul and become nothing more than ritual and power. In that setting, he asked a question that shook the entire system. How could things that cannot hear, see, or protect themselves deserve to be worshipped? Ibrahim's confrontation with idols was not merely physical destruction. It was the overthrow of a false spiritual order. When he was thrown into the fire, it was not just a sentence against one man, but a declaration that truth was not allowed to exist if it threatened power. Yet the fire did not burn Ibrahim. In that moment, a deeper truth was exposed. Real power does not belong to the masses, but to complete reliance on Allah. From that point on, Ibrahim became the symbol of pure tawhid, laying the foundation for a stream of faith that could not be extinguished by violence or time. Ibrahim's journey did not stop at personal belief. Allah tested him in ways that touched the deepest parts of the human heart. Leaving his homeland, living many years without children, and being commanded to sacrifice the son he loved most were not meant to break him, but to elevate him. His willingness to place Allah's command above all worldly attachments earned him the title Khalilullah, the close friend of Allah. Faith was no longer just words. It became a choice proven through action. From Ibrahim, humanity branched into two major lines through Ismail and Ishaq. One grew in the harsh desert of Mecca, tied to the Kaaba and the foundations of worship. The other developed in the fertile land of Canaan. The Qur'an makes it clear that geographical and lineage differences were never meant to divide Allah's plan. Both lines shared the same root, Ibrahim's tawhid. But when people clung to bloodlines and privilege, diversity became a seed of conflict. Yaqub, son of Ishaq, faced a different trial, one of fatherhood and prolonged loss. When Yusuf was taken from him, he did not rebel or curse fate. His pain was not denied, but transformed into deep patience. His statement that he complained of his sorrow only to Allah was not resignation, but the highest form of faith. It showed a human being acknowledging pain without allowing it to destroy the bond with the Creator. The story of Yusuf elevated this legacy to another level. Betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery and imprisoned unjustly, Yusuf experienced nearly every form of injustice humans inflict upon one another. What made his story unique was not suffering itself, but how he preserved moral integrity through it. Even when he held absolute power, he did not turn past pain into revenge. Instead, he used that power to save lives, including those who had wronged him. His forgiveness healed his family and shattered a common human cycle, that the oppressed will become oppressors when given the chance. Across generations, the family of Ibrahim demonstrated that faith is not transmitted by blood alone, but through trials, choices, and continuous loyalty to Allah. Each generation faced a different form of testing, but the core question remained the same. Would they place Allah above themselves? When the answer was yes, faith became a force that transformed suffering into meaning, loss into elevation, and family history into salvation for humanity. At this point, history shifts away from civilizations destroyed by arrogance and focuses on a lineage measured not by power or territory, but by devotion to tawhid. This stream would continue with even harsher trials and deeper lessons as it entered the era of Bani Israel and their unprecedented sequence of tests. When the story reaches Bani Israel, history becomes a prolonged journey of continuous testing, where blessings and responsibility walk side by side. This community was given more prophets than any other, not because of inherent superiority, but because they carried a heavy moral burden. Here an uncomfortable truth is revealed. Being chosen does not mean being exempt. The more guidance one receives, the greater the accountability. Shu'aib emerged as an early warning about social and economic ethics. His people were wealthy, yet they twisted justice for personal gain. Cheating in measurements, dishonest trade, and oppression of the weak became standard practice. His call was not to abandon the world, but to correct how one lives in it. Faith was not measured by prayer alone, but by fairness in transactions and integrity in daily life. When society refuses to correct behavior for the sake of profit, consequences may not arrive immediately, but they arrive with enough force to shatter a community. Ayub represents a different trial, not collective but deeply personal. Losing wealth, children, and health, his faith was not tested to see if it would disappear, but to show that true faith remains even when every worldly reason for hope is gone. His patience was not silent resignation, but steadfast attachment to Allah through pain. His story reminds us that suffering is not always punishment, and Allah's silence can be a space for spiritual growth. Musa appeared at a time when oppression had become systematic. Bani Israel were enslaved, stripped of dignity, and treated as tools of power. His mission was not only to free bodies, but to liberate souls from fear embedded across generations. His miracles were not displays of spectacle, but dismantling the illusion that worldly power is supreme. Yet even after liberation, old fears and habits lingered. Complaints, doubt, and betrayal showed that escaping external chains does not guarantee internal freedom. Harun demonstrated the role of patience in leadership. When Musa was absent, human weakness surfaced clearly. The worship of the golden calf was not only a theological error, but a reflection of collective insecurity, as people sought visible symbols to replace trust in the unseen. It revealed how fragile faith can be without deep understanding. After Musa, Bani Israel's history continued to swing between obedience and rebellion. Thamud and Sulaiman represented a peak of power where law, territory, and divinely guided leadership came together. Thamud showed that true strength lies in justice and self-control. Sulaiman, despite unmatched authority, proved that wealth and power do not inevitably corrupt when placed in submission to Allah. Yet even this golden age carried a dangerous temptation: complacency. When later generations turned away, Allah sent Ilyas and Al-Yasa to call them back to tawhid. Resistance hardened hearts. Yunus stood out as a unique case, not because he failed, but because his story revealed Allah's mercy beyond human expectation. A people seemingly destined for destruction were saved when they collectively repented. It affirmed that history is not a one-way road to ruin. It can change direction when hearts change direction. This chain of prophets exposes human nature itself. Quick to forget blessings, slow to learn lessons, yet constantly given opportunities to return. Bani Israel are not portrayed as a symbol of failure, but as a mirror of the ongoing struggle between light and darkness within every community. The Qur'an does not condemn a people, but warns all humanity that greater guidance brings greater responsibility. As the line of prophets approached its conclusion, history entered its most fragile stage. Truth was no longer hidden by ignorance, but distorted by power, fear, and self-interest. The question now was whether divine revelation could transcend ethnic boundaries and become a message for all humanity. Zachariah appeared in a society rich in ritual but empty of spirit. Not a warrior or orator, he quietly called people back to moral law. In old age, his prayer was not for status, but for continuity of truth. Yahya, granted to him, was not just a biological miracle, but proof that Allah revives hope where barrenness is accepted. Yahya spoke truth to power and paid with his life. His death was not truth's defeat, but a silent indictment of a society that refused to listen. Isa followed as an even stronger sign. His fatherless birth did not challenge reason, but reminded humanity that Allah's power is not bound by familiar rules. His miracles healed bodies and souls, not to build a kingdom, but to restore hearts. Yet his message was misunderstood. Some elevated him beyond limits, while others sought his death. Allah raised Isa, affirming that truth cannot be killed by human schemes. The promise of his return became a bridge to humanity's final chapter. In this context, Muhammad was sent as the seal and completion of revelation. He came not with a spectacle, but with a book that challenges intellect and conscience across all ages. Illiterate by worldly standards, his message could not be dismissed as human fabrication. The Qur'an entered law, ethics, and inner life. It did not retell history for nostalgia, but for warning. Muhammad's mission transcended tribe and land. From the harsh desert of Mecca, his message broke barriers of race, class, and color. Facing mockery, violence, and isolation, he responded with patience and mercy. The migration was not just a journey, but a historical turning point, where a community was built on justice and shared responsibility. The first state was not founded on swords, but on mutual commitments and ethical order. In his final sermon, Muhammad spoke not of conquest, but of equality, women's dignity, and attachment to the Qur'an. The completion of revelation did not end human responsibility. It began a new phase where every individual became a carrier of the message through conduct. The Qur'an was given to the entire ummah not as privilege, but as a continuous test of sincerity. The story of the prophets does not end in complete peace, but with a reminder that the road ahead remains challenging. The promised return of Isa will mark the final stage when truth and falsehood are clearly separated. Until then, each generation carries the responsibility to learn from the past and avoid repeating the same collapses. From Adam to Muhammad, history is not a series of isolated events, but one unified message spoken in many voices. Allah is one, humans are accountable, and salvation is tied to sincere return. When revelation is complete, the final question is no longer for the prophets, but for humanity itself. Will these stories remain distant memories, or mirrors reflecting the path we are walking? The deepest lesson of prophetic history is this: Allah does not rush punishment, but He does not neglect indefinitely. He sends reminders before trials, trials before consequences. And the Qur'an affirms a hopeful truth: sincere repentance can change destinies. Adam was forgiven. Yunus saw an entire nation saved. Yusuf turned suffering into mercy. History is not rigid fate. It bends when hearts bend. Applied to today, each person can ask, where do I stand in this flow? Am I repeating the arrogance of fallen nations, or learning patience, humility, and trust from the prophets? In an unstable world, faith is not escape, but a foundation for responsibility, justice, and compassion. Returning to Allah begins not with grand gestures, but with correcting how we treat others, how we earn, and how we face hardship. If these stories feel less like the past and more like reflections of the present, join the Prophetic History Explained community to explore prophetic history, divine laws of civilizations, and faith-based lessons for today. And do not forget to subscribe, so we can continue delivering meaningful, truthful, and impactful content in future videos.